Welcome to this quiet space, created just for you. Tonight, we will visit an old friend. You may have seen his paintings, but you might not know his name. He was a hermit, an alchemist, a poet who spent his life trying to spin sunlight into gold. He was not like Rembrandt, who dissected the depths of the human soul with heavy brushstrokes. Nor was he like Rubens, who depicted mythological passions with brilliant colors. He simply remained in his studio in the small Dutch town of Delft, painting, with almost painstaking patience, the eternal, ever-changing light that streamed through his window. His name was Johannes Vermeer. For the next while, please, let go of the weariness of your day. Let go of all your scattered thoughts. Let us slow down time, so slow that we can almost hear the dust motes dancing in a beam of light. Together, we will walk through his short yet incredibly rich life. This is not just a story about an artist. It is a long meditation on the act of seeing, on the art of waiting, and on how to find a moment of inner peace in a tumultuous world. Now, find a comfortable position, close your eyes, and allow your breath to become gentle and deep. Our journey begins now. Our story begins with a city, because to understand Vermeer, we must first understand the soil from which he grew. The 17th century Netherlands, a republic freshly won from Spanish rule, a low country, forged below sea level with windmills, dikes, and indomitable will. This was a golden age belonging to merchants and sailors, whose fleets sailed to every corner of the globe, bringing back spices, porcelain, wealth, and a new way of seeing the world. And Delft was a delicate, unassuming pearl in this golden age. It was not the bustling heart of finance and trade, like Amsterdam. Delft was calmer, more orderly. The city was embraced by ancient walls, like a secure cradle. Clear canals were its lifeblood, spreading like a spider's web through the city, reflecting the elegant silhouettes of the red brick gabled houses along their banks. You can imagine walking the cobblestone streets of Delft in Vermeer's time, what sounds you might hear. Perhaps the melodic, punctual chimes of the new church in the distance. Perhaps the soft splash of a pole breaking the water's surface as a boatman guides his barge along the canal. Or perhaps the sound of a housewife vigorously scrubbing the steps before her home. A love for cleanliness and order that bordered on obsession. This devotion to cleanliness is key to understanding the spirit of Delft, and indeed of all of Holland. Visitors from abroad were often astonished by the diligence of Dutch housewives. They would use water from the canals to rinse the stone paths at their doorsteps again and again, until the ground glistened wetly in the sun. They scrubbed their windows until the glass was as transparent as crystal, as if it weren't there at all, simply to allow more light to enter their homes. This was not merely about hygiene. It was a manifestation of morality and faith. In Calvinist doctrine, cleanliness was next to godliness. A clean, orderly home was the outward sign of a pious soul. This pursuit of order was deeply ingrained in Vermeer's DNA. The almost geometric stability of his paintings, the complete eradication of clutter. This was the spirit of Delft, perfectly projected onto canvas. The city's economic pulse, meanwhile, was intimately connected with the Far East. The Dutch East India Company, the VOC, had one of its 6 major chambers in Delft. The company's ships brought back porcelain from China. With their delicate textures and elegant blue patterns, these pieces captivated the Dutch. But they were expensive, affordable only to the wealthiest classes. The artisans of Delft saw an opportunity. They began to imitate these treasures from the East, using local clay covered with a white tin glaze, then painting them with blue pigments in patterns that were both exotic and distinctly Dutch. This became the world-renowned Delft blue pottery. Soon, Delft was the porcelain capital of Europe. On a small piece of pottery, the city held a dialogue between East and West. This curiosity for the exotic, combined with a confidence in local craftsmanship, is also reflected in Vermeer's paintings. The oriental rugs, the exotic-seeming garments worn by the women, all hint that this small town possessed a heart open to the world. And of course, we cannot forget the windmills. In the fields beyond Delft's city walls stood countless enormous windmills. They were not just scenery. They were a tool for survival. These tireless giants waved their arms, pumping water inch by inch from the low-lying lands into the canals, and then out to sea, creating the very ground on which the Dutch lived. They also powered industry, grinding grain and pressing oil. The windmill was a symbol of the Dutch struggle against nature and their ultimate harmony with it. Their rhythmic, repetitive turning was like the steady, resilient heartbeat of the nation itself. This peace and prosperity, however, did not come from nowhere. It was a prize won in a long and brutal struggle. Just before Vermeer was born, the Netherlands had finally ended its 80 years' war for independence from Spain. Generations had lived under the shadow of war. When peace finally arrived, the entire nation was immersed in a sense of relief and a deep appreciation for the hard-won tranquility of daily life. People longed for stability, for creation, for the warmth of home. This collective mindset explains why genre painting, depicting quiet, everyday life, flourished in the Dutch Golden Age. It was an affirmation of reality, a celebration of the now. The supreme tranquility in Vermeer's paintings was the most poetic response to this longing of his time. But there is always another side to the coin. This new republic was also filled with speculative fever and human desire. Just a few years after Vermeer's birth, the Netherlands experienced an unprecedented economic bubble, tulip mania. The price of a single, rare tulip bulb could be inflated to several times that of a grand house on an Amsterdam canal. People sold their homes and possessions to gamble on these flowers. Fortunes were made in an instant, and just as quickly vanished when the bubble burst. This frenzy swept through society like a fever, revealing the immense desire for wealth and the collective irrationality bubbling beneath the surface of placid civic life. While there is no evidence that Vermeer's family participated, this national clamor forms a stark contrast to the supreme anti-clamor, the quietude of his later paintings. Perhaps it was precisely because he had witnessed this external madness that he became so determined to construct, within his studio, an eternal, stable world of inner order, untouched by any outside trend. So, you see, Delft was just such a place, contradictory and fascinating. It held both an obsession with order and cleanliness, and a curiosity for the world. It cherished the peace of domestic life, yet was gripped by a fever for wealth and speculation. It was in this atmosphere, one that pursued order, valued interiority, and was deeply interested in the act of seeing itself, that Vermeer was born. His paintings are the most perfect crystallization of his city's spirit. He did not paint the bustling markets of Delft, nor the epic dramas of the Golden Age. He simply distilled the city's very essence, that inner, light-filled tranquility, and placed it upon his timeless canvases. In the autumn of 1632, Johannes Vermeer was born in an inn in Delft named the Flying Fox. His father, Reinier Vermeer, was a typical striver of the Dutch Golden Age, a figure worth pausing for. His life was a miniature success story. Reinier's first profession was as a silk worker, kaffelwerker, a craft requiring fine handiwork with brocaded fabrics. This might explain why Vermeer, in his paintings, showed a sensitivity to the texture of textiles that was beyond the ordinary. But Reinier was clearly not content with this. He had a more agile mind and broader ambitions. In 1631, he joined the Guild of St. Luke in Delft, registering as an art dealer, kunstverkoper. This was a pivotal move. The Guild of St. Luke was the trade organization for all professions related to creation. Painters, sculptors, potters, even saddlemakers were all members. Membership granted one the legal right to do business in the field. A few years later, he acquired an inn on Delft's bustling market square, naming it Mechelen, after the old name of a Belgian city. This inn would become the place where Vermeer spent his childhood and adolescence. We can imagine what a lively place it must have been. The market square was the social hub of the city, and the inn was a hive of activity, drawing merchants, travelers, and local citizens. Here, Reinier managed lodging and dining, while also using the walls to display and sell paintings as part of his art-dealing business. For the young Vermeer, this inn was his first art museum and his first school of social observation. He likely sat quietly in a corner, watching it all. He saw people from different classes, heard all kinds of stories, and he was certainly exposed, from a very young age, to different styles of painting, listening to his father and the patrons discuss a painting's composition, color, technique, and, of course, its price. For him, art was not some distant, holy temple. It was a common object on the walls of his home, something to be touched, appraised, and talked about. This early immersion undoubtedly shaped his practical yet discerning eye for art. However, as for how Vermeer went from being a child who grew up looking at paintings to a master of his craft, history has played a joke on us. It has left almost no definitive records. His apprenticeship is a fascinating blank. To register as a master painter in the Guild of St. Luke, one had to complete at least 6 years of training. Vermeer became a master in 1653, which means his apprenticeship must have taken place between 1647 and 1653. Whom did he study with during this time? The most romantic and compelling theory points to Karel Fabricius. He was one of Rembrandt's most brilliant students and later moved to Delft. Fabricius's style differed from his master's intense drama. He was more obsessed with light, space, and complex experiments in perspective. Some of his works, like The Goldfinch, with its poetic capture of a daily moment and its sensitivity to light, are considered the crucial bridge between Rembrandt and Vermeer. Tragically, in 1654, a catastrophic explosion at Delft's gunpowder magazine leveled Fabricius's studio. He was killed and most of his works were lost. If he was indeed Vermeer's teacher, then this disaster might have pushed Vermeer, even earlier, onto a path of completely independent exploration. Others suggest that Vermeer may have been influenced by the Utrecht Caravaggisti, painters who had traveled to Italy and brought back Caravaggio's dramatic use of light and shadow. In Vermeer's early works, such as Christ in the House of Martha and Mary, we can indeed see this kind of theatrical chiaroscuro. But in the end, this historical blank may be a clue in itself. Vermeer's style is so unique, so much his own, that it is difficult to clearly trace the hand of any single master. He seems more like a solitary explorer who absorbed influences from many sources, and then, behind closed doors, conducted a long and lonely experiment. He drew nourishment from different wells, but ultimately, he digested and fused them in his own way, creating an unprecedented visual language that was entirely his. The most important turning point in his life occurred in 1653. That year, at the age of 21, Vermeer made a decision that was quite significant for his time. He married Catharina Bolens. It was a marriage that was initially met with strong opposition. Catharina came from a much wealthier family than Vermeer's, and more importantly, they were devout Catholics. Vermeer, on the other hand, was raised in a Protestant, Calvinist, environment. In that era, Protestantism was the official religion of the Dutch Republic. While Catholics were tolerated, they were often subject to social restrictions and discrimination. Catharina's mother, Maria Thins, was vehemently opposed to the match. She felt Vermeer's family, both in social standing and financial status, was not good enough for her daughter. According to a legal document from the time, a Delft painter mediated, assuring Maria Thins that Vermeer was a respectable young man of sound financial means. But Maria still refused, reportedly saying she would rather lie in the canal 24 hours a day than see the marriage take place. But eventually she relented. Perhaps it was her daughter's persistence, or perhaps Vermeer made a significant promise. A widely accepted theory is that Vermeer converted to Catholicism for the marriage. This decision, at the time, meant he might lose some Protestant patrons, but it opened up a whole new world for him. This decision brought him not only love and a family, but also invisibly shaped his artistic world. Shortly after their marriage, the couple moved in with his mother-in-law, Maria Thins, in her large house in a neighborhood known as the Papists' Corner, Papenhoek, a community of wealthy Catholics. This house became the place where Vermeer would create all the masterpieces of his later life. We can imagine what this move meant for Vermeer. He went from the noisy public environment of an inn to a more private, affluent, and devoutly religious domestic space. His mother-in-law, though initially opposed, became one of his key supporters. Her home contained works of the Italian school, allowing Vermeer to study, up close, Caravaggesque light and shadow and a sense of compositional drama. More importantly, he had a stable and peaceful environment in which to work. His wife, Catharina, would bear him 15 children over the next 2 decades, 11 of whom survived. She became his staunchest supporter, and perhaps the model or inspiration for many of the female figures in his paintings. How Vermeer found such a space of supreme tranquility in a household teeming with so many people is a mystery in itself. Perhaps that north-facing studio was his sanctuary against all the clamor of the outside world. When he closed that door, the entire world was reduced to just him, his canvas, and the eternal beam of light from the window. Now, let us gently push open that door. This studio is on the second floor of the large house, with a window facing north. For a painter, a north-facing window is a gift from the heavens. It never receives direct sunlight. It provides a stable, even, and slightly cool diffused light, the perfect light for observing the subtle colors and textures of objects. This was Vermeer's sanctuary, his alchemical laboratory, the center of his entire universe. Let us look around. The floor is laid with black and white marble tiles. This cool, rhythmic, geometric pattern became the foundation for many of his paintings, lending them a mathematical stability and harmony. It is like an unfinished chessboard, hinting at the games of strategy and balance being played out in the minds of his subjects. This precise grid of perspective placed irrational emotions within a rational spatial framework, creating a wondrous equilibrium. On the wall, there might be a large map of the Netherlands, its leathery texture glowing softly in the light. This map is not just decoration. It suggests that this small room is intimately connected to a vast world. Let's move closer and look carefully at these actors, who appear again and again in his paintings. First, the map. It is perhaps the most prominent background element in Vermeer's work. We see it in The Officer and the Laughing Girl, in Woman in Blue reading a letter, and in The Art of Painting. This isn't just a boast of Holland's cartographical achievements as a seafaring nation. It is more like a window, a psychological window to the outside world. The woman in the painting, though in a quiet room, may have her thoughts drifting along the shipping routes on the map. The letter she is reading might have come from one of those distant corners of the world. The map gives a closed space a sense of infinite extension. It represents distance, longing, and the larger, unreachable world. Then there are the musical instruments, the lute, the viol, the harpsichord. They are almost inseparable from the female figures in Vermeer's paintings. In 17th century Holland, musical ability was a sign of a good education and an elegant medium for courtship and love. In the music lesson, a woman plays with her back to us, while a man stands by, listening quietly. The air is filled with a subtle emotional exchange. The instrument symbolizes harmony, both musical harmony and the harmony between people. But it also hints at the passage of time. Music is a temporal art. It vanishes the moment it is played. A lute left idle in a corner might speak of a love that has passed, or a harmony that has been broken. Now look at the mirror. On the wall in the music lesson hangs a small mirror. It reflects not just a corner of the room, but the painter's own contemplation on seeing and reality. Mirrors have always held a dual symbolism. They represent truth by reflecting accurately, but also vanity in the obsession with one's own image. The mirrors in Vermeer's paintings often show only a blurred reflection, as if to say that what we see is not necessarily the whole truth. Reality, perhaps, is like that reflection in the mirror, something we must interpret, something we must guess at. And the pearls, pearl necklaces, pearl earrings. The most famous, of course, is the one that gleams brightly in the darkness. Pearls, at that time, were a symbol of wealth and social status, but their deeper meaning relates to purity, wisdom, and inner beauty. A pearl is formed from a grain of sand, layered over a long period of time inside a shell. The process itself is like a spiritual practice. The pearls in Vermeer's paintings are often the luminous eye of the composition. They gather all the light, becoming the focal point of our vision. They represent a precious, silent beauty born from the ordinary. Finally, there are the exotic carpets and Chinese porcelain. Heavy Turkish carpets are usually not laid on the floor but used as luxurious tablecloths, their complex geometric patterns and rich colors adding texture and an exotic flair. The blue and white porcelain fruit bowl on the table directly points to the trade links Holland established with the East through the VOC. All these objects silently speak of the family's wealth and taste, and also show how a successful Dutch family of that era could condense the entire world into their living room. These were Vermeer's words. With this limited vocabulary of objects, like a poet with a finite set of words, he arranged and combined them to create infinite poetry. And the ink with which he wrote these words on canvas was his magical paint. Vermeer was a true alchemist of color. Let's talk about the most precious treasure on his palette, ultramarine. The word literally means from beyond the sea, and it was aptly named. In the 17th century, the only source for ultramarine was the lapis lazuli stone from the remote mountains of Afghanistan. These precious stones had to travel thousands of miles along the Silk Road, passing through the hands of many merchants to reach Europe. At the time, its price was higher than that of gold of the same weight. Most painters would only use a tiny bit of ultramarine, and only for the most important parts of a painting, like the robe of the Virgin Mary. But Vermeer was unbelievably lavish. He would use pure ultramarine to paint a maid's apron, a decorative sash on a woman's dress, or even the blue cushion of a chair. Why was he so insistent? Because no other blue could replace the deep, saturated, yet luminous quality of ultramarine. It had an inner glow. The process of grinding the pigment to get the purest blue was itself a slow, ritualistic practice. An artisan had to crush the lapis lazuli, grind it bit by bit with a pestle in a mortar, and sift out the impurities. Then, the fine powder was mixed with wax, resin, and oil to form a dough. This dough was then kneaded repeatedly in a lye solution over a long period to extract the purest blue particles. Vermeer, perhaps, participated in this process himself. He knew that only the purest pigment could capture the purest light he saw with his eyes. Besides ultramarine, he also favored a warm, bright yellow lead tin yellow. This pigment could perfectly render the bright but not glaring quality of sunlight on an object. You can see its brilliant use on the bodice of the maid in The Milkmaid. He masterfully blended lead tin yellow with ochre and white to create the texture of a warm fabric that you could almost smell the sunlight on. His way of painting walls was even more remarkable. He wouldn't just use a flat white or gray. He would mix earth yellow, ochre, and lead white to create a subtle, warm off-white. Then, he would even mix fine grains of sand into the paint and apply it thinly to the canvas. When light hit this slightly rough surface, it would create a soft, diffuse reflection, making the wall seem as if it were breathing. He elevated the use of color to an emotional and psychological level. Every brushstroke was a meditation. Now, let us choose one painting and take an extreme slow-motion tour. Let's step into the art of painting. This work is considered by many to be Vermeer's artistic manifesto. First, what catches our eye is a huge, intricately patterned tapestry hanging in the foreground. It is pulled back from the left, like the grand curtain of a theater being drawn for us. This design is incredibly clever. It immediately tells us that we are not intruders. We are invited spectators. We are about to witness a sacred performance about the act of creation itself. Our gaze moves past this curtain and into the studio. On the left is the familiar window, but it is obscured by the tapestry. We cannot see it, but we can feel the soft, bright light it casts, illuminating the entire scene. In the center of the room stands a woman, wearing a laurel wreath and a blue silk robe. Her wreath symbolizes honor and immortality. In her hands, she holds a book and a long trumpet. The book represents history. The trumpet represents fame. She is the personification of Clio, the muse of history, the source of the painter's inspiration. Her head is slightly bowed, her expression serene and introspective, as if lost in her own world. The blue silk robe, in the light, shows a rich play of folds and subtle shifts in color. Undoubtedly, Vermeer's treasured ultramarine was used here. And before her sits a painter, with his back to us at his easel. We cannot see his face. Is it Vermeer himself? Perhaps, perhaps not. This figure is more like a symbol, a representation of all creators. He wears a black beret and a lavish black and white doublet. His posture is focused yet relaxed. On his easel is a canvas he has just begun. Interestingly, the first thing he has painted is the laurel wreath on the model's head. He starts with immortality. This seems to suggest that the mission of art is to transform fleeting reality into the eternal. Our gaze continues to the back of the room. We see the huge map of the 17 provinces of the Netherlands on the wall. The edges of the map are slightly curled with age, and the light leaves a soft highlight on them. There is a prominent crease down the center of the map, as if history itself is full of fractures and turning points. Looking up, a golden brass chandelier hangs from the ceiling, but there are no lit candles in it. This seems to say that the light illuminating this room is not man-made, but the natural light from the heavens, outside the window. The entire composition is as rigorously constructed as a piece of fine architecture. The perspective lines converge precisely at the model's hand. Every object is in its proper place, together forming a harmonious, orderly, and deeply symbolic perfect world. This painting is Vermeer's most profound interpretation of his own art. It tells us that painting is not just about imitating reality. It is about transforming abstract concepts like history, fame, and inspiration into a visible, eternal form through the magic of light and shadow within a carefully constructed space. Vermeer never sold this painting. It hung in his home until he died. It was his treasure, his manifesto, a silent monument he left for himself. If we say that Vermeer was a poet, then light and silence were the only grammar he used. Let's first talk about light. In Vermeer's hands, light is no longer just a tool to illuminate objects. It becomes the protagonist of the painting, a character with life and personality. Sometimes the light is gentle, full of affection. It is like a mother's hand, softly stroking the cheeks and clothes of the figures, giving their skin a texture so delicate it seems you could break it with a touch. It envelopes the entire space, creating a serene, warm atmosphere, as if time itself has become soft. Sometimes the light is rational, possessing an almost architectural structure. It clearly defines the contours of the room, the volume of objects, and the spatial relationships. The interplay of light and shadow forms the stable, geometric framework of the painting. It makes everything orderly and logical, providing an intellectual pleasure and a sense of security. And most of the time, the light is mysterious, the driver of the narrative. What does it illuminate, and what does it hide in the shadows? Vermeer often uses light to guide our gaze. It draws our attention to a letter on the table, a forgotten musical instrument, or a string of scattered pearls. These objects, lit by the light, become clues to unlocking the mystery of the painting. And the figures' expressions or the backgrounds, placed in shadow, leave endless room for our imagination. So, how did he do all this? We must return to that magical tool, the camera obscura. There has been a long debate among scholars about whether Vermeer used a camera obscura. Today, most believe that he not only used it, but relied on it heavily. This is not to diminish his genius. On the contrary, it shows he was a forward-thinking experimenter, adept at using the latest technology to aid his art. Let's understand how the camera obscura works in more depth. It transforms the three-dimensional real world into a two-dimensional flat image. In this image, perspective is rendered automatically and perfectly. This explains the impeccable sense of space in Vermeer's paintings. More importantly, the lens of the camera obscura produces a unique optical effect on light that is not observable by the naked eye. The most obvious effect is what we mentioned earlier, the circles of confusion. When light hits a bright, reflective object, the lens of the camera obscura cannot focus all the points of light precisely. Thus, in the projected image, these highlights become small, blurry, diffused circles of light. If you look at the bread in the basket in the milkmaid, it is covered with these small, soft, breathing halos. Look at the red threads in the foreground of the lace maker. The threads almost completely dissolve into a haze of these blurry light spots. This effect gives the paintings a wondrous, dreamlike quality, almost like modern photography. The camera obscura also changed the painter's perception of color and tone. In its projection, shadows are not treated as simple black or gray, as in traditional painting. Instead, you see that the shadows are filled with rich, subtle colors, reflections of the ambient light from surrounding objects. Look at the white walls in Vermeer's paintings. In the shadow near a blue silk robe, The wall will be subtly tinted with blue. In the shadow near a red carpet, it will have a warm, reddish glow. He painted how light reflects and influences itself in a space. He painted the ecosystem of light. Now, let's make a comparison to better understand Vermeer's uniqueness. Let's look at his predecessor, the Italian Caravaggio. Caravaggio also played with light and shadow, but his was the light of drama. His cellar lighting, tenebrism, came from a single, strong source, striking diagonally, carving figures out of a bottomless darkness. The boundary between light and shadow was as sharp as a knife. His light was full of conflict, tension, and passion, aimed at creating the most intense visual and emotional impact. Now let's look at his contemporary, the greatest Dutch painter, Rembrandt. Rembrandt's light was a psychological light, the light of the soul. His light often focused on a person's face and hands, while the body and background merged into a warm, mysterious brown. Light was used to reveal the ineffable pain, struggle, and wisdom deep within the human heart. Rembrandt's light had warmth, it had weight, and it touched the soul. And Vermeer's light was completely different. His light was physical, optical, phenomenological. He was not concerned with dramatic conflict, nor was he obsessed with excavating the inner lives of his subjects. He was concerned with light itself. Like a scientist, he calmly, objectively, and almost obsessively observed and recorded how light reflected, refracted, was absorbed, and diffused on different surfaces. His light was cool, rational, and analytical, but it is precisely because of this extreme objectivity that he achieved a transcendent poetry. He allowed us, for the first time, to purely see light. Now let's talk about silence. Vermeer's paintings are so quiet, you can hear almost no sound. Even when there are musical instruments in the scene, you don't feel the music playing. The music seems to have just ended, or is about to begin. Everything is in a state of in-between. This silence is not an empty void. It is a state full of tension, full of content. It is a state where silence says more than words. What are the women in his paintings doing? They are reading letters, playing music, trying on necklaces, gazing out of windows. These are all extremely private, inward-looking activities. Their expressions are always focused, yet detached. They seem to be immersed in their own thoughts, oblivious to the outside world. Vermeer used this silence to protect his subjects. He created an undisturbed, absolutely safe inner space for them. We, as viewers, are invited to witness this moment, but we are asked to remain quiet. This is an act of profound respect. This silence also reflects an ideal of the 17th century Dutch middle class. In a world that had just emerged from a long war and was full of uncertainty, the home became a harbor against the storms of the outside world. What Vermeer painted was precisely this idealized, orderly domestic space, filled with an inner, spiritual life. Light and silence, in Vermeer's paintings, are complementary. Light makes silence visible, and silence gives light a space in which to settle. Together, they create a unique atmosphere, a spiritual experience that transcends the specific objects depicted. Looking at a Vermeer painting is like engaging in a visual meditation. Your breath unconsciously slows down, your mind gradually becomes clear. You stop thinking about what the painting is about. You simply are with that quiet light and that deep silence. This, perhaps, is why Vermeer's art, 300 years later, can still touch us so deeply, we who live in such a noisy age. He reminds us that deep within ourselves, there is also a quiet room, waiting to be illuminated by light. For most of his life, Vermeer's world was as calm and orderly as the scenes he painted. He was elected head of the Guild of St. Luke, which shows he was held in high esteem by his fellow painters. With the income from selling his paintings, he and his wife raised their enormous family. Everything seemed to be moving along a predictable track. However, the tide of history eventually broke through the peaceful dikes of Delft. This tide had a specific name, the disaster year, Rampjar. It was 1672. The powerful king of France, Louis XIV, the self-proclaimed Sun King, had long cast a covetous eye on the wealthy and proud Dutch Republic. He allied with England and 2 German states, launching a devastating attack on the small nation from both land and sea. When the news broke, the entire country fell into unprecedented panic. The French army, well-equipped and seemingly unstoppable, quickly overran large parts of the eastern Netherlands, its forces marching directly toward Amsterdam. The Dutch army, once a source of national pride, was nearly helpless against the French onslaught. To defend their last homeland, the Dutch government made a tragic decision: to open the dikes and let the North Sea flood their own land. This Dutch waterline, an act of self-destruction, temporarily halted the advance of the French army, but it also paralyzed the entire country. Commerce ceased, shipping was disrupted, and the financial markets collapsed. The economic foundation that had supported all the prosperity and art of the Golden Age crumbled in an instant. The national motto shifted from peace and prosperity to the nation is in peril, every man to his duty. For Vermeer, who made his living selling paintings, this was undoubtedly a fatal blow. In an age when even bread was a luxury, who would buy a painting of a tranquil domestic scene? The art market froze solid, almost overnight. We have no detailed records of his last few years, but we can piece together the difficult times from the statements his wife, Katharina, later submitted to the court. We can imagine the pressure he was under. He had a huge family to support, and his wife was still bearing children. He was likely burdened with heavy debt. His early, costly use of expensive pigments had now become a crushing weight upon his shoulders. Was he still insisting on using expensive ultramarine? Could he still maintain his unhurried, deliberate pace of creation? We do not know, but his late works seem to reveal subtle changes. Take, for example, the allegory of faith. The mood of this painting is strikingly different from his earlier work. In it, a woman representing faith sits in a dramatic pose on a platform, one foot resting on a globe symbolizing the secular world. Behind her is a large painting of the crucifixion, and on the floor in the foreground, a snake, crushed under a stone block, lies dying. The entire scene is filled with complex Catholic symbols, and the style feels more deliberate and exaggerated, as if created to please a specific Catholic patron, losing the natural, heartfelt tranquility of his earlier works. The painting still has his signature light and texture, but the serene soul seems to have quietly departed. It feels more like a commission, a job completed out of desperation for survival. In the winter of 1675, Johannes Vermeer died in the city where he had lived and worked his entire life, Delft. He was only 43 years old. In a letter to her creditors, his wife, Katharina, described her husband's death. She said that after the war broke out, he fell into a great decay and decadence, because he could not sell his own paintings or those of others. He was so distressed by this, she wrote, that he went from being a healthy man to being dead in a day and a half. This painter, who had spent his life depicting tranquility and order, may have ultimately died from the anxiety and despair of a chaotic age. He died leaving behind a family with 11 mouths to feed and a mountain of debt. Katharina was forced to declare bankruptcy. To settle the debts, she gave up the last of the paintings in the house. The art of painting, his artistic manifesto which he had never sold, she used as collateral to her own mother, Maria Thins, perhaps hoping to keep it in the family. But the fate of his other paintings was even more grim. A Delft baker, Hendrik van Buyten, took 2 of Vermeer's paintings to settle an enormous bread debt of 617 guilders. On the bill, the name of a man who created timeless beauty and the name of one who provided daily bread were juxtaposed in a heartbreaking way. The poet of light thus made his exit amidst ruin and the cries of creditors. His name, along with his paintings scattered like pearls, was soon forgotten by the world. Vermeer was gone. For nearly 2 centuries after his death, the world seemed to have forgotten him completely. His paintings were held in scattered collections of royalty and private collectors across Europe, but they were often misattributed to other, more famous painters, like Peter de Hooch or Gabriel Metzu. His name appeared only in old baptismal records, marriage documents, and debt ledgers in the archives of Delft, like a distant, faded footnote. He lay quietly under the dust of history. Like the figures in his paintings, he was silent, waiting for the moment of his rediscovery. And that moment eventually came. This light that re-illuminated Vermeer came from a Frenchman named Théophile Thorberger. He was not just an art critic, but also a passionate democrat and revolutionary. During the wave of revolutions in 1848, he was forced into exile for his radical political views. It was this decade-long exile that gave him the opportunity to travel through the museums of Holland, Belgium, Germany, and England. Like a lonely detective, he searched through the vast sea of art for buried treasures. In 1842, when he first saw Vermeer's view of Delft at the Mauritshuis in The Hague, he was deeply shaken by the painting. He later wrote that he had never seen a painting like it. It possessed a sense of light and tranquility he had never encountered before. It was not the realistic depiction of a traditional landscape. It was a landscape steeped in emotion and memory. He keenly realized that this could not be the work of an unknown painter. This artist had to be a great master, buried by history. From that moment on, finding Vermeer became Thorberger's near-obsessive life's work. He adopted the pseudonym Berger, which means citizen, to express his political beliefs. He was like a citizen police of the art world, determined to seek justice for this historically mistreated artist. Like an art archaeologist, he traveled between Europe's major museums and private collections, searching for paintings of a similar style but attributed to different artists. He scoured countless documents, trying to string these scattered pearls back together and restore the true identity of this Sphinx of Delft. The difficulty of this task, in an era without the internet or even widespread photography, is hard to imagine. In 1866, Thorberger finally published a series of monographs on Vermeer. With passionate prose, he announced the existence of this forgotten master to the world. He attributed more than 60 paintings to Vermeer, though later research proved some were not authentic. But it was his effort, like a beam of light, that pierced through 2 centuries of fog and illuminated Vermeer's name. The world finally rediscovered the poet of light from Delft. From that moment on, Vermeer's reputation began a slow but steady revival. The Impressionist painters, like Monet and Renoir, learned from him how to capture fleeting moments of light. Vincent van Gogh, in a letter to his brother Theo, also marveled at the wonderful harmony created by the combination of colors in Vermeer's paintings. But it was perhaps the writer Marcel Proust who elevated Vermeer to a divine status. In his masterpiece, In Search of Lost Time, he devoted several pages to describing a character, the writer Bergot, who, in the final moments of his life, drags his ailing body to a museum to see Vermeer's view of Delft one last time. He is particularly captivated by a little patch of yellow wall in the painting. A patch of yellow so exquisite, so unique, that it makes him feel that his entire life's work has never reached such heights. He dies right there in front of the painting. This famous scene in literary history has forever linked Vermeer's art with a love for art so extreme that one would even die for it. Even the surrealist master Salvador Dali held a strange reverence for Vermeer. He repainted Vermeer's works several times and regarded him, along with Raphael, as a model of perfection, calling him an edible, aphrodisiac, and aesthetic ruin. By the 20th century, Vermeer had gone from being a forgotten painter to one of the most revered masters in the history of Western art. His works are so few that the discovery of each one is enough to make headlines in the art world. They are treasured in the world's top museums, drawing countless people on pilgrimages. People stand before his paintings for a long time. What do they see? Perhaps they see more than just 17th century Holland. They see an ideal, an eternal longing for a beautiful, tranquil life filled with inner value. In a world that is getting faster, noisier, and more fragmented, Vermeer's paintings provide a sanctuary where our souls can rest. With his slow, focused, almost stubborn life, he proved to us that the most profound is often found in the most ordinary, and the grandest can be contained in the smallest of corners. He never traveled far, yet he depicted an inner world more vast than any nautical chart. And so, our story of Vermeer comes to a close. The poet of light has returned to his eternal tranquility. But but his light, having traveled through more than 300 years of time, still warms us. He reminds us that even on the most ordinary of days, it is worth waiting for a beam of light, to notice how the light falls on the pages of your book, how it makes a glass of plain water shine. He also reminds us to build, within ourselves, a quiet studio, undisturbed by the outside world. There, you can place your thoughts and listen to your inner voice. Now, let your thoughts, like Vermeer's paintings, slowly settle. All the colors dissolve into the quiet darkness. All the sounds return to the final silence. Your breath becomes long and steady, like that gentle stream of light in his paintings. Good night. May you have a deep and beautiful dream, wrapped in a tranquil glow.